I am a man of many talents or responsibilities, whichever you choose to call it. Welcome to the Meridian Adventist Sabbath School. We are glad that you're here today, and we are looking forward later to hearing the Redeemed Singers. Let's start with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful that you have called us to rest on the Sabbath from our other things and to solely focus on you, which we are love to give you praise and adoration because of your greatness. We ask that your Spirit would be with us today concerning a subject that might be a bit touchy. Impress our hearts to know what are the right things to do for you. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Our lesson today is in number 3, is titled The Tithing Contract. Is it okay if I have a little umbrance with their title? Because to me, a contract says, I do something and then you do something in return. It's a deal. And in that respect, the tithing contract is accurate. However, when it comes to tithing, I mean, it's all God's stuff anyway, and I'm just his manager. I'm supposed to do what he tells me or instructs me to do. And so I don't know, contract, I'm just managing somebody. So I changed it to the tithing blessing. And I hope you're okay with that. Because all of them say that. They don't say contract. And for that reason. So without further ado, for those who are watching online or may be visitors here, there are different resources for studying the Sabbath School. And so we wanted to list a few of them here on the screen so that you're aware of them. I enjoy all of them and use them for preparing when I teach, and we wanted to let you know that. So this week's overview, we're just going to go through the different lessons. I still don't understand why they don't give something for Sabbath, a title for Sabbath or Friday, but they don't, so I didn't put one in there either. Our memory text, can we say this together? Is that okay? Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open up for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such a blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. And that's from Malachi in the Old Testament. That's a wonderful promise, and I want to focus a little bit on the word blessing. Did you know that in the Bible that there are a lot of verses about money? And sometimes people think that correlation is causation, right? I mean, if I touch a hot stove and my finger is burned, that's causation, isn't it? I can make that. And then I know, don't touch the hot stove again, right? Don't do that again. That was a mistake. So my first thought was, well, boy, if the Bible talks a lot about money, then God must be really interested in money. And that would be a little bit of a leap, wouldn't it? We would want to look at the context of those statements to find out, and we are going to do that. So what does blessing mean to you?
Goodness. Something good.
We have an orange, I don't know your sound person's name.
Daniel?
Daniel, could you grab that orange mic for us and just turn it on? So blessing means what?
Something good.
Something good.
Something special that's happened to you.
Special.
Happy.
Mm-hmm.
Happy thing.
Any other definitions of blessing? I'm just wondering because when I read a verse that says God's going to bless me, I'm going to apply my thought process, which I didn't necessarily verbalize or think out, and I'm going to apply it to something else, right? So we want to all be on the same page if, as a group, as a community, we're thinking about that. I like to give the example of, I got this from an art book. If you, when you draw things, like you can draw a stick man or something like that, you see a stick man. But in artists sometimes, they're clever people. I'm not one of them. And so sometimes what they do is they draw everything but the chair. And then what do you see? If they drew everything but the chair, what do you see? You see a chair, don't you? An outline, yes. So you recognize, I see that pattern, I know what it is. So I'm concerned that when we have a definition that we're all applying it the same way. And my first thought was blessing might mean that somebody could say, well, that relates to money. If God's going to bless me, that means I'm going to have more money in my bank account, or somehow I'm going to be enriched. And that is true that sometimes that happens. But that's not the only type of blessing that God wants to give us. Because if money were truly the source of happiness, then Elon Musk would have been the happiest man on earth, wouldn't he? Because at one time he was I can't remember who's number 2, somebody who makes bags for a living. Ladies' apparel and stuff. But if that were true, and since we know, based on some of his public communications, he's not necessarily a happy guy. Yes?
It's been years since I dug into this, but I was going through the Old Testament and looking at blessings and blessed, the word. And in Hebrew, the Hebrew word in places is translated blessed.
Mm-hmm.
And the same Hebrew word is translated cursed. And so to me, blessing is, because I can say, bless the Lord, O my soul. Well, how do I bless the Lord? How do I bless the Lord? Unless it is giving him my full attention. And how does he bless me? By giving me his full attention. And that can go with good things, or it could go with some cursing as well.
Love this participation.
Yeah, the Hebrew word is barak.
Mm-hmm.
And it's used in the same context, say, with Jacob blessing his sons. So it's the implication that literally means to stoop or bend over.
Mm-hmm.
It is God stooping and bending over and pronouncing, prophesying on us, just like Jacob did at the end of his days with all of his sons.
I look at the blessing as not so much us blessing other people by giving, which we do. We help maintain the church. Blesses us and gives us faith to have faith in giving that tithe and trusting God to make it work.
We're going to talk more about that today. Thank you. You're not getting ahead of me. You're just, yeah. Preach it, sister. Do you feel forced to give gifts to loved ones, or is it something you desire to do?
Every time I look at my bank account at Christmas. So every time I look at my bank account at Christmas, I feel forced. But no.
For those with children, or perhaps younger relatives, do they enjoy getting gifts? Yeah, they love it, because that's a way that they understand that somebody cares, right? And sometimes, so there's the love languages, there's the different types. Some people, if you give them the gift, they're just like, it's flat. It's like, oh, okay. But if you do something for them, if you run to the store, or if you do something that for a relative, oh my goodness, they're over the moon, right? They're fantastic. So even the kind of giving that occurs is dependent both on the giver and the receiver. There's these different aspects. And the reason I ask the question this way, it's a little bit maybe adversarial. It's meant to, create thought. When I give something to somebody that I really care about, it's not because, I didn't meet my wife and then say, well, now I'm going to have to give her a gift, if we get married every year, I guess, if I have to. No. Because I love her, and I want to do that kind of thing. Because I know I want to find out what makes her happy so that I can do those things. I can't actually, just for clarification, in case my kids might be watching, you can't make somebody else happy, can you? You can influence it, but you can't make them. And I think that's true of us too, isn't it? Can God make us happy? We have to choose to be happy. We have to choose what we do. It's our choice what happens there. And are we tempted to try to serve more than one master? And that's in our lesson today. One of the things I read would be like, trying to serve more than one master is like trying to chase two rabbits that aren't in a pen. It doesn't work. I like that one. There were, I didn't count them, but somebody said that there were about 2,300 verses about money. And there are approximately 39 or 40 parables, depending on how you count. And 11 of those involved money. So again, I come back to that thought. I wonder why God's focusing. Why, when I do this, high-level review, is God talking about money? Is that because he's interested in money? Is it because he wants to hoard money? Because he wants to give out money? Why is it a money? Why would God choose that subject at such a high rate? When you're talking to someone, I can tell you, I've done, I work for HP, and I've done remote support and talked to people at various levels of intellect, various level of experience. And I can tell you that whenever I'm talking to a customer and I'm trying to work them through an issue, I'm trying to also find out what their interests are and what things that they understand. Because then, when I'm talking to them, I can use examples. If they like NASCAR racing, I can use that to help them. I can use that analogy, can't I? And if they love something else, sailboats or whatever, I can then translate my information to them in a way that they would understand. So it's quite possible, and this is for you to decide, that because we are interested in wealth, which in our today's vernacular is money, or wealth in some way, that God said, oh, okay, since that's going to be their interest, I'm going to use that to help explain things. So we want to look at some other things, and trust me, we will get to the lesson. I know we're not there yet. Does that mean that God is focused on wealth? I don't think so. He owns everything. Why would he care? He owns everything already. So I don't think that can be his focus. I think we can cross that off of the list. So let's look at some of the Bible verses that I just said, some of those 2,300 verses. In Matthew 6, it talks about, don't store up for your treasures on earth because, those can be taken from you. Oh, well, if I'm trying to develop something or have a value, where can I put it? And the next part tells us that where your treasure is, your heart is also. So store up treasures in heaven because nobody's breaking into heaven. Nobody's taking stuff out of there. That is the safest security system ever in the universe. Another verse says you can't serve two masters from the same general location in Matthew, and either you will love one or hate the other. And so you can't do both God and money. You can't do both. But sometimes that becomes a challenge, doesn't it? Because we still have to handle money. I mean, I can't live in today's economy without money. I have to pay my bills. I need to take care of things. I want to give gifts. I want to take care of the church and those kind of things. So even if I have to deal with money, I want to make sure it's not the important thing. It's a function. I like to think one time we were studying the Sabbath, and it says, the verse, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And I was trying to think of, is there another way that I can say something and make this clearer? And so I thought, a car is made for man. Right? A car was made so that you could get around, go places quicker, carry things that you wouldn't normally be able to carry. Right? So the car was made for man, not the man for the car. And the Sabbath works the same way. The Sabbath isn't there for me to serve it. The Sabbath is to serve me. It has a purpose. It does something for me, just like the car does something for me. And God created that because he cared about me and you. Because the Sabbath isn't just for me. The Sabbath is for everyone. There was a parable regarding the payment of vineyard laborers, which you've read it. The verse is up there. I'm not going to go through the story. Okay, so you remember the story though, right? There was people who started early in the day, and there were people who came throughout the day. And at the end of the day, some people worked 1 hour. And when the time for payment came, and they paid the late workers first, and they got a full day's wage, what did the full day workers think? We're going to get more. Wow, if that's the kind of generosity of this person, we're going to get more. And then what did they get? They got the same, a full day's wage. And then there was a discussion. Hey, I worked all day, and that guy over there, he only worked 1 hour. What's the deal? And the master said, it's my money. I can do whatever I want with it, right? Did I cheat you? Did I tell you that I was going to? I paid you your day's wages? Right? So we can look at that in today. I mean, I'm not Elon Musk. I'm not the second richest man in the world. Thank goodness. You know, with wealth comes responsibility. If you suddenly became a billionaire, you'd have lots of people knocking at your door wanting some of that money, because they would figure, well, you know, $1 billion is tough to spend. Let me help you with that. And I've got a list of how you can help me. And I'll help you by helping you. No. That's a lot of stress in our lives. So the parable was about money, but was it about money? Or was it about a relationship? I'm going to ask that question. Or was it about God's favor? Was God showing favor on everyone? He was interested in everyone having something, which is his right. In this Bible verse, it says, money is the root of all evil. Oh, wait, did I read that right? The love of money. Money is just money. It has no, it doesn't do anything by itself. It's inert. But the love of money can be a problem, can't it? Because if we start loving money because of what money can do for you or the influence it brings. I started reading this, I was sitting someplace and I started reading this book that was a thing on Facebook, and I'm like, oh, a book, okay. It's an interesting story. I think I'll read about it. Oh, this young man who grew up an orphan, suddenly he's very wealthy. Oh, I wonder what he's going to do with it. And I stopped reading the story because he was very angry at a lot of people. And because of his anger and his newfound wealth, he used it to be just like them, the people that he hated. They had not treated him right, and so in response, he treated them poorly. He could have been gracious with that, but he chose not to. And I thought, my wife was recently diagnosed with some health issues, and as a result, we've made some changes in our lives. I don't watch the news anymore. I look at the news a little bit, just like a tiny bit. I used to check several times a day. Wonder what's happening. Wonder what's happening. Wonder what's happening. Wonder what his view is on it. What's their view? Get both sides. Be balanced. So, in the recovery process, we found, you know what? You can reduce your stress. And one way you can do it is not listen to the news. Doesn't mean don't be informed. You know, take an hour a day. So I went a whole week. Then look at the news. Came to the end of the week. Okay, I'm going to get my hour. You know, I've been waiting all week. Yeah, I went 30 minutes. And at the end of 30 minutes, I was, what am I doing? This is depressing. Yes, I need to stay current on what's happening. I need to be able to live in the world that I'm in. But I don't need all that drama. I don't. I can't impact necessarily what's happening. I need to stay current, but I can't do that. So the love of money has created a problem. Satan wants us to think about the money and not what it can do. Why would God bless people with money? We look at that example. We look at Abraham. Did Abraham hoard it all and treat his servants badly? Or did he take care of them? And the more he took care of them, the more God blessed him. And then you have the story of Job. Job didn't do anything wrong. He was a man righteous before God. And all of a sudden, he loses everything except for his wife. Through you, all nations shall be Barak. Blessed, like you said before. That's important, isn't it? So we look at these examples and we want to look at them in context so that when we come to our money decisions, which sometimes when people talk about money, people get nervous. Well, you're going to try and get money out of my wallet? Whose money is that? The money in my wallet belongs to God. I'm just managing it for him because he asked me to. That's what he asked me to. So as long as I have that mindset, if he says give it all away, I didn't lose anything. He hasn't asked me to do that yet, and I don't know if he will. Maybe he will. So let's look at a few of the parables. There's the parables of the hidden treasure and the pearl, if you remember that one. There's the parable of the unmerciful servant, where the one servant was forgiven some huge amount of money, and then over a pittance, he puts a friend in another servant's in jail. So did he learn anything about forgiveness? He didn't. And he ended up back in jail. So again, see the pattern? The money was in the story, but the money wasn't about story. The story wasn't about the money. It was about the relationship. Yes. Here's the microphone.
In regard to that parable, of course, the king is God. And the point is that when we worry about the $1,000 I owe over here, or the $650 that somebody owes me, the point is, what is all that compared to what God has already done for us?
Yes. What is that comparison? What somebody might owe me pales in comparison to what I've been given. And so that's a good lesson to learn. The parable of the prodigal son. The son went and said, give me my stuff. I don't want to wait for you to die. And yet, the father didn't need to do that. He could have told his son, go pound sand. You just wait till I die. Maybe I'll just give you nothing. That's not what happened. And when the son finally did come back, the father rejoiced. And that story, I'm the son. I think you're the son in the story. That doesn't mean that's what you did with your money. But it's an example for us to put ourselves in the story and understand what is God trying to teach us in these lessons. The parable of the tenants, where they said, oh, yeah, we're not going to pay the landowner. And finally they killed his son. That was about possession, about wealth, wasn't it? They're like, if we kill the owner's son, no inheritance. It's all ours. Parable of the talents and what was gifted was about money. Talent was quite a bit of money. The parable of the moneylender with Mary and Simon. Remember? Simon came and was like, do you know who this woman is that's touching you? How could you degrade yourself? And he told a story. Which two people had debts, and one of them, which one, he asked Simon, of the two people, which one was more grateful? The one who owed little or the one who owed much and was given forgiveness? The one who owed much in forgiveness would have the greater gratitude. And then Jesus said, where you're measuring this thing over here, I'm measuring something different. I'm measuring gratitude. So if you have a lot of wealth or not so much wealth, can you still have gratitude? Yeah. And God's measuring how much gratitude you might have. Just because he's interested in gratitude and praise. Not because he needs it, not because he's narcissistic, but because it's a value for us to do those things. And then there's the parable of the rich fool, the rich man and Lazarus. And what happened? Again, that wealth, you don't take it with you. So there's all these stories. We're finally to the lesson. I told you I'd get there, and I'm keeping my promise. All those stories tell us that the money stories in the Bible are not generally about money. But they do teach us lessons because we understand how money works. So on Sabbath, Abraham returned from a successful hostage rescue mission in Sodom. And what happened? He had every right to keep all the people and all the wealth, which I don't quite understand how that works. Some invading force comes and takes your people and stuff. You go and rescue them, and then you have the right to them. The invaders didn't have any right to them. Why would you have a right to them? I don't understand that. Well, that's how their culture worked. And so Abraham said, okay, I'm going to keep all this. This is my stuff. Is that what happened? No. What did Abraham say? Look, the food that the people ate, on the rescue mission, yeah, we're not paying that back. And I need to pay a tithe. But the rest of all the people, you get all the people back. I'm like, oh, good, because they didn't tithe on the people. Because otherwise, you would have to keep people and give them to the priests, and I don't know. That would just kind of get messy, wouldn't it? Kind of interesting how it works. So here's a story we hear about tithing. And I would like to say something about this, because it's something I've observed in the Bible or reading any story. When you get up, or if you journal, I'm not a journaler, but if you journal, do you write down absolutely everything you did? Or what was important? Or what the thoughts were? Which of those things special about the day? So because it says that Abraham tithed, does that mean that the rest of the time Abraham didn't tithe? It doesn't say that, does it? It just mentions it. And so we have to then look at, and I wouldn't suggest using one story, but in this story it says he tithed, and it doesn't say whether he was tithing before that or after. It just says in this time he did. So it could be that he did tithe the whole time, but this time they just mentioned it. It's an unusual situation, and they said, okay, he tithed. Just so that we're clear. Didn't have to say it, but they did, yes.
I think one of the really fascinating implications of this story, we get the impression that Abraham was called to go to a pagan land.
Mm-hmm.
A land where the knowledge of God was non-existent.
Is that on?
Yeah, it's showing a red light.
Yeah, red light is muted, so if you hit the bottom, just hit the red light gently. There you go. Thanks.
We
called
have
for a foreign land.
We have the idea that Abraham went into a foreign land without the presence of the knowledge of God. A pagan land full of Canaanite Baal worshipers and Asherah worshipers and sun worshipers.
Mm-hmm.
While much of that was true, the implication here is that the worship of God was well established, because Melchizedek, king of Salem, king of peace, was a worshiper, was a priest of the Most High God. And we believe that Salem was Jerusalem. He was king of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that Abraham brought God into this pagan territory is really not exactly true. That God had ministered to the Canaanites. And it just fascinates me. And then that Abraham paid tithe to this Melchizedek tells me that Abraham saw Melchizedek, and Hebrews bears this out, as more important in the eyes of God than himself.
So it would be important to know what we're learning from this story, right? Yes.
Ellen White says that the Lord has never been left without a representative. So certainly Melchizedek was one of those representatives.
Yes. And so Abraham was doing what he felt. He didn't need that wealth. He didn't. It would have been nice if he had had it, but he recognized, no, I need to do the right thing here because of God. And in the meantime, everyone else is watching. Abraham's focus is not on the other people. He is telling them what he's doing. But he says, no, I can't keep your stuff. They're like, well, we just want the people. They didn't have any right to ask for that. But they said, you keep the stuff. And they're like, no, we're giving everything back. We're going to pay the tithe. I kind of get the impression, because I wasn't clear when I read the story, that he paid the tithe, so he did take something out of it, and then he gave it back to them. And they're like, wow, this guy, he could have taken everything. What a witness that would be to them. And then later, Moses told Israel, you shall surely tithe all the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year, that you may learn the fear of your God always. So the tithing was supposed to do something? Supposed to teach them something? What was it teaching them? Respect. Was it teaching them trust? Because if you take some of your stuff and you paying tithe isn't giving it away. It's not a bill. You're managing. Right?
There is an element where the Sabbath is kind of a tithe of time to God, in a reminder that God deserves our time, that it's not all ours, and also that he will take care of us. If we've got things piling up and all this work to do and stuff like that, to take the Sabbath off is in a sense giving up those worries and those stresses to God. But to tithe our money, 10% is in many ways doing the same thing. It's recognizing that you are taking care of us, that this money is yours, and that I am not the one who will take care of me. I am not the one who is going to get me out of my problems, per se, but that I trust you with both my time, with Sabbath, and my money, because I trust you to take care of me.
Exactly. It's a part of our faith journey to know that when we trust God and see how he works things out. Now, I've noticed that things, when you measure them in the middle, don't really tell you a lot. But if you measure the edges, that's also more information, and sometimes perhaps more important. When somebody's really wealthy, like Abraham, and God continues to bless him, that teaches us one thing. But when we also, I'm not going to say I have a fascination with, but I also think about those who gave their lives in the Colosseum. After Jesus' resurrection, and there was a lot of talk about Jesus, and there were these people who had been dead and were alive, and now they're walking around. Yeah, you're not hiding that. There's no fake news here. That message was going everywhere. So, and as a result, the Roman government felt perhaps there's a problem, and for whatever reasons, whatever they may be, they started killing Christians in the Colosseum. So those people who got killed in the Colosseum were faithful to God, and yet they died. So was God unfaithful to them? Becomes a question. Is God truly faithful? Just because you're a Christian, does that give you a shield from all the bad things that happen?
We wouldn't grow if we didn't live through experiences. And we get our blessings not from having so much, but in having the Lord and knowing he's caring for us. I used to think that, I got to help everybody I can, and if somebody comes to me and they need money, I need to give it to them, and you know what I'm saying, if I have it and all of this. And so I was just like overextending myself, even getting myself into debt. And one day a friend of mine said, well, that's your problem, Georgia. You're not letting God give them the blessing that they would have if they had faith and waited for him to act. But you jumped right in there. And maybe God had a different plan. Maybe he did want you to help. but not, not to where it's your detriment, you know. And so, yeah, that's how we get our blessings. And sometimes we don't get everything.
That's
We're
right.
not meant to. But that's where we need to learn that we don't need everything. We just need Him.
Yes, Sandra.
One of the things we also need to remember is we're also in the middle of a battlefield. And our witness means something. So those people who died in the Colosseum, what are the accounts we have of their deaths? I really haven't heard a lot of accounts of them running and screaming and cursing God while they were die in the stadium. Instead, I hear accounts of them praying and singing as they die. And that these persecutions exploded the church. And why did it explode the church? Because people in those Colosseums were looking at that going, they're not behaving normally. They have got something. They are not afraid.
That's different.
That's different. And I want to find out why they're not afraid, because I'm scared spitless. That's why I go to these things, so I can, and that's kind of one of the things why people go to these things, is because they fear death, because they fear these things. It gives them some excitement or some, and I wouldn't call it necessarily comfort, but more of a trying to dull the fear by making the fear common, I guess, the fear of death common, by seeing death a lot. I don't know. Desynthesizing yourself, if you will. But they saw these people dying nobly, and they went away respecting Christians more, and the church grew more during those times. And I think sometimes we forget what our witness may be during those times. I remember being a little surprised because, we went through 2 failed adoptions, and someone came to me. We sang a special music that talked about holding a baby. And someone came to me and was like, I couldn't believe you sang that song after that failed adoption. It's like, well, it kind of crossed my mind, but not much, because what was more important was the message of the song. And what was more important was worshiping God. And that makes impressions on people, though we don't necessarily always intend it to. But sometimes when people see us going through tough times and still praising God, it makes an impression on us. And sometimes that's where the joy comes from, and the blessing comes from, is knowing that you can go through these tough things and God is protecting your soul, because it doesn't break you. You see it breaking other people, but it doesn't break you, because you've got God and you've got trust in Him. And I think that's one of the biggest things of what the blessing means, is that whatever I go through, it's not going to break me. Kind of like the 3 friends in the furnace. Throw us in the fire. It won't change our mind, because you can kill us, still we will serve Him.
And that's, I think, an important lesson, right? You mentioned Daniel's friends on the plain of Dura. Yes.
I think another reason why we go through trials, and we need to remember, even so, we need to remember that God is with us, is because if we didn't go through trials as Christians, we wouldn't be able to relate to those around us, even those who are not Christians. And if we didn't go through trials, we would want to keep living here on earth. And God has something so much greater for us.
Amen. And those trials, God often, when He brings us through those trials, we then become an expert witness. And God can bring others who have the same challenge, and now we can partner with them in a way that otherwise wouldn't be possible. I was not in the military. I can't tell you about PTSD. I don't understand it. I'm not even going to try. I know that it's real, and I know that it's a challenge, but that is not one of the areas that I can minister in. Other areas I can minister in. So I think that I agree with you. Those trials aren't just for our betterment in the long run. It's also to help develop our faith, and then we then become more empowered. We've got more things in our tool chest that the Holy Spirit can use us for. Yes?
Just to bring it kind of back to the point, because we're talking about these trials, and the reason why we're able to go through them is because we have developed a trust in God. And tithing and the Sabbath are two of the major ways in which we build that trust. And so that is one of the reasons why tithing is so important. It is, when you are a child, when you have children, you don't make them tie their shoe like that. They have to go through, okay, first you need to learn how to put on your shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got to learn how to make that first part of the knot. And once you've perfected that part, then we can go into the more complicated thing. Tithing is like that for us. If we start small, God can build our trust. And which brings me to one of my favorite tithing stories, which is about, that I heard at Redwood Camp meeting, about this young couple, brand new Christians. And they hear a tithing sermon, and they go, well, we're really poor. I don't know if we can afford to tithe, but we have this little side business. Let's start tithing on that. And they start tithing on their side business, and their side business starts growing and prospering, and so they start tithing on everything. And after a couple of years, they decide growing marijuana is not a good idea. But God takes us where we're at, takes us at small places, builds our trust until we can trust Him fully.
I'm trying to think of the guy who's the preacher now, but I'm not going to tell the story because we're running out of time. But there was a musician who had somebody who came when they were under the influence of something, and the one young man who was visiting gave the whole story, the whole Daniel and Revelation thing, and the next morning they got up and they started reading, and then eventually they started carrying backpacks to their concerts and taking out, who wants a great controversy? And they started throwing them out to the crowd, not Christians at all. It's an amazing story. At the Sodom, let's see, did the system of giving to God start? When did it start? At the Sodom rescue or before? Before.
We have it from Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. How about before that? Didn't God have to sacrifice some animals for them to have clothing? Yeah. I'm not trying to nitpick. I'm just saying the point is the sacrificial giving, the giving back to God is not new. And there's some who would think or believe that, well, I'm going to tie that to the Jewish people or to the Hebrews, and so we want to make sure that we have the timeline right. Tithe equals a tenth. It means turning 10% of our income or increase to God. The first mention is in Genesis 14. Melchizedek's, I must have out of a typo there, meeting with Abram, because he wasn't Abraham yet, was he? So, tenth and tithe, and then later we see that in Hebrew. Hebrews 7. And why is it important to understand tithing? It's because it's something that is not originated in the ancient Israelite legal or religious system. It's not. It's much older than that. And what message should we, who live after the cross, take from this truth? That God's trying to tell us something. He's trying to lead us in the way that is best for us. After all, God went to a great deal of effort to save us. He sent His Son down here to live a perfect life, to be crucified, to be killed in a horrible way that was very painful. But the most painful thing, although you read some of these gruesome things that happened to Him, the most painful thing for Him wasn't those physical things. It was separation from His Father that killed Him. That's why He died early. It's the relationship. I know I keep coming back to that because I think it's important for us to understand it's not about the stuff. It's about the relationship. When I give a gift to my wife or I do something for her, that is not because I feel legally obligated. It's not because I have a plaque on the wall that has my marriage license. That is not the reason. The marriage license is there because that's important to me. I want people to know, yes, we're married. we're together. The storehouse is defined, and because of lack of time, we're going to kind of go through some of these quickly. But it's the storehouse God has developed. Where is the storehouse, and where does it? Does blessing equate directly to money? Could be yes. I don't know, if you had an apple orchard and you showed up with a couple of pallets of apples and gave it to the church, I'm not sure what they would do with that. They might rot. Might be better off selling those and then donating the money, which is portable. The purpose of tithing, which was to represent an offering to the Lord, I have given to the Levites an inheritance. So the Levites didn't have land. They weren't agricultural. They weren't raising animals, were they? So the tithe went to them to support them in order that they could then continue the religious education and the spiritual well-being of the tribe. That was the intent. Let's see, have you experienced a great truth that it is more blessed to give than to receive? Have you ever experienced that? I don't know, I got an inheritance once that was quite substantial. And that was a tremendous benefit to me and my sons. And at the same time, I want to turn around and do that same thing for others. Maybe I can't do exactly that same thing, but I can do other things where people have needs that I can help meet, that God has put me in their path so that I can then bless them. Because after all, we are God's hands.
I liken it to, as a father, I have a son.
Mm-hmm.
And everything my son has came from me. And in one way or another, I paid for it. What do I feel about my son's possessions? I want more than anything for him to be generous. And I'm disappointed when he has friends over and doesn't want to share his toys. On the other end of the spectrum, if my son decides to wrap up one of his Hot Wheels in paper and give it to me as a gift, do I have need of his Hot Wheel car? No.
No.
But does that still touch my heart?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Why does the government take taxes out before you get a paycheck in the United States? They don't trust people? But do you think some people might just decide not to pay? You know, that actually does happen. You know, casinos, they now tax people at the casino because they get their winnings, and the government doesn't see their part of it. That's a contract in my mind. I don't think of tithe that way. Although when I do get a paycheck, I want to make sure that I'm paying my tithe. I don't relate those two things. Some people have said they're similar, and they are similar, and that money changed hands. And there was a mathematical method to it. But I think that's where the similarities end, and the differences come is that the government, I'm not sure, necessarily has my best interest in mind. I would hope they would. We vote for people to have that happen, but my experience has been that's not always what happens. Whereas when I pay tithe, when I return my tithe, that's when, like the son giving the Hot Wheel, God doesn't need it, but it allows him, it helps me to grow, and that consistent. Have you ever practiced something and eventually you get it right? You know, eventually you're not, especially musicians, I'm imagining, not a musician, tried to be. Sometimes I occasionally pull out my guitar, but not very often. You have to practice, and eventually when you get it right, oh, it's so enjoyable, isn't it? Yes. We have 2 minutes left on the clock. We'll probably run over.
Some people will sometimes say that they won't pay their tithe because they don't know where the money is going to, or because they don't trust the conference or whatever for where the money is going to. But when you look at tithe as an exercise in your faith, I think you get a different perspective. The tithe is for me and not necessarily, after it leaves my hands, it's God's money. God can punish or reward those to whom are the caretakers of it as he sees fit, but it's no longer my responsibility to worry about where it's going. Because the purpose of paying tithe is for me to develop my relationship with him, not necessarily because of what the tithe will be spent on. And I think that's an important mindset that's different, say, than with taxes per se.
That's right. Because we don't have a choice about paying taxes. But where the tithe is concerned, I trust that God's got things in control, even when I see things that make me wonder. God still knows. He's going to judge those people. I don't have the capacity to do it, or he's not, those people. He's going to judge each individual. I don't need to be in that business. It also means I don't need to be blind, because it does say be careful, right? And be cautious. And like you were saying about the honest tithe, whether it's I can't remember if I put something in here about the, I didn't. It talks about the honest tithe and, net or gross. That's not a discussion for Sabbath school, in my opinion. That's something between you and God. You work it out. You pray to him, he will give you the answer. Really, that's not about a relationship. You're trying to do math there. You work on that. Just like you talked about the couple that started one area and then they grew into that. That's what we, I think, need to be doing.
Jesus say to the Pharisees, you tithe mint and cumin, yet you do not see to the weightier matters of the law, taking care of those who need.
Taking care of those who are in need. God said we will always have the orphans and the widows and the prisoners with us. And we are his hands for them. So the more we trust God, the more he can trust us. And you think about Joseph, he was certainly in some adversarial situations, and God was able to use him in a mighty way. God doesn't always use everybody in a mighty way like that. These are examples that we have. So can God be trusted? I believe he can be. I think that's what the Bible is telling us. All the different stories about money tell us he doesn't need our money, but he wants us to participate so that we can be part of the blessing. That's why we are here. And what about bad things happen to good people? Well, yeah, I could judge that. But at the same time, I want God to be in charge and let him work it out. He's very capable at that. I am not. And how do we handle our money as stewards? What does that tell us about our personal belief system? That's something for each of you to answer for yourself. It's not something for us to discuss here. Next week, we're going to be discussing offerings because that's different than tithe, isn't it? So let's close with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we know that this is a challenging subject for us, only because sometimes we are addicted to, or we are worshiping money and not you. And you want the best for us. Help us to grow each day as we learn to be better stewards of your money and better representatives of you, that others can see how much you love us. And when they see that, they can then see that they want that same thing that we have. Thank you for allowing us to participate in this way. And we give thanks for your Spirit and the love you shower on us each day. Amen.